Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a topic that's seriously misunderstood. This whole idea that autistic people are hypocritical.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
It really is. And we're lucky enough to be diving into this article from Cheap ABA. It's called Debunking the Myth. Autistics are hypocrites compared to allistics.
Catchy title.
It is. And it really gets you thinking, right? Like, have you ever, I don't know, come across a situation where someone autistic, their behavior seemed, I don't know, kind of contradictory?
It's something that comes up a lot, this disconnect between how neurotypical and neurodivergent people experience the world.
In this article, it doesn't shy away from that. It
Yeah.
dives into how we communicate, social norms, even how we express emotions.
The heart of it is we often misunderstand because we're projecting our neurotypical expectations onto autistic individuals.
Like we're all working for the same playbook, right?
Yeah.
But the article, it points out that things like small talk, indirect communication, all those unwritten rules, it's not always intuitive for people on the spectrum.
Right. And that's often where these accusations of hypocrisy come in. Like an autistic person might say they value honesty above everything else.
Right, right.
Then that same person might say decline an invitation to a party, even if they, actually care about the person.
Because they don't want to go to the party.
Exactly. And to someone who's, used to white lies or trying not to offend, that directness, it can be jarring.
Like they're speaking a whole different social language.
Yeah. And this difference in how we communicate, it's even more, significant when we talk about emotions.
Because we often connect certain facial expressions, tones of voice with specific emotions.
Right. But the article, it suggests that's a very neurotypical way of seeing things.
Okay. So how does that play out?
Well, you see, autistic individuals, they might express their emotions differently.
That doesn't mean they're not feeling them though, right?
Exactly. In fact, the article, it mentions a bunch of studies that challenge this whole idea that autistic people lack empathy.
There was that one study, I think it was from Cambridge. They found that, yeah, autistic people might interpret social cues differently, but they often have a much deeper understanding of emotions than we give them credit for.
Exactly. That's a perfect example. Just because someone expresses discomfort differently doesn't mean they're indifferent.
We're talking about a completely different way of experiencing and showing emotions, not a lack of emotion, right?
Exactly. And this is where, the concept of masking comes in.
Masking. Okay, for those of us who, might not be familiar, can you break that down? How does it connect to this idea of hypocrisy?
Sure. So masking, or social camouflaging, it's this thing where autistic individuals adopt behaviors to fit in with, neurotypical norms.
So they're constantly adjusting how they act to
Yeah.
avoid judgment.
Basically, it's exhausting, and it can lead to so many misunderstandings because people are only seeing this masked version.
Not the real person.
Right. And when the mask slips, which it inevitably does, it can be confusing for people who don't get it.
So then they might see that as hypocritical.
Exactly. Like imagine someone who's bilingual, right?
Well, yeah.
They switch between languages depending on who they're talking to, but that doesn't make them fake.
It just means they're adapting.
Precisely. It's about recognizing that different situations call for different approaches. And for some autistic individuals, that takes a lot of conscious effort.
So it's not about hypocrisy. It's about, like you said, different ways of being, right? Different neurology.
Exactly. And the article, it doesn't just, explain the problem. It actually dives into the research.
Oh, yeah, the good stuff.
Right. And there's this one study, it was published in Autism. It found that a lot of autistic individuals, they actually prioritize honesty, like way more than we might expect.
Which honestly makes sense, given what we were just talking about with, communication styles.
Totally. They found something like 80% of autistic people in this study, they put honesty above almost everything else.
80%. Wow. Okay, that's huge. So we're not talking about a small group of people.
Nope. And this really reframes things, doesn't it? Instead of being hypocritical, this suggests that, autistic individuals, they might actually be more committed to being genuine.
More authentic.
Yes. And this commitment to honesty, it can get misread sometimes as a lack of empathy, which the article talks about too.
Because again, we're assuming everyone expresses empathy the same way.
Yeah, and the article makes this point that, autistic individuals, they often feel empathy very deeply, even if it doesn't look how we expect it to.
Right, like they're not cold or uncaring, they just might show it differently.
Exactly. They even talk about this 2018 study, it was from Cambridge, I think, and they found that while autistic individuals might Yeah, they might interpret social cues differently, but their capacity for understanding emotions, it's often just as strong, if not stronger, than neurotypical individuals.
So it's more about how they process those cues, not that they're not feeling them.
Right. And this is where we get those mismatches, I guess, in how we communicate that then, some people misinterpret as hypocrisy.
It's like that saying, don't assume, ask. Right. But in this case, it's more like, don't assume hypocrisy, consider neurodiversity.
I like that. It's about being curious,
Right,
trying to
right.
understand someone else's perspective instead of just judging them. And speaking of research, there was another study, I think it was in Nature.
Oh, yeah. What did they look at?
They measured people's actual physiological responses to emotional situations.
So like their heart rate, their sweat, things like that.
Exactly. And they found that autistic individuals, they often had the same or even bigger reactions than neurotypical people.
Wow. So inside, their bodies are reacting just as strongly, even if it's not visible on the outside.
Exactly. So much for not feeling empathy, right?
Right. Okay. This is blowing my mind.
Yeah.
It really shows you how easy it is to misjudge someone based on like what we think we see.
It's a great reminder to, not jump to conclusions. And the article goes on, it mentions another study from the Journal of Autism and Developmental Disorders. And in this one, they found that a lot of autistic people, they form incredibly strong, meaningful relationships.
Which again goes against that stereotype that, you know, they're not interested in connecting with others.
Totally. This research, it highlights how deep and authentic those relationships can be.
I mean, it seems like everything we've talked about points to this. The myth of hypocrisy.
Mm.
It says way more about us than it does about autistic people.
It's true. And the article, it really emphasizes this need to shift from like judging to understanding.
Meeting people where they are.
Exactly. We got to embrace the whole spectrum of human experience, and realize that what seems contradictory to us, it might make perfect sense once you understand how someone processes information, how they interact with the world.
So less jumping to conclusions, more asking questions.
100%. When we label someone as hypocritical, especially without understanding their experiences, their neurology, we just shut down communication,
And we reinforce those harmful stereotypes.
which have real consequences. This isn't just about hurt feelings, this impacts how autistic people are treated in school, at work, even in their own families.
It's huge.
And that's why their article, it really pushes for this more inclusive approach, one that values neurodiversity, that recognizes the strengths, the unique perspectives that autistic people bring.
We talked about that statistic earlier that 80% of autistic individuals prioritize honesty. That really stuck with me.
It challenges everything we think we know, right?
It does, because then it's like, wait, maybe that direct communication, even if it's a little awkward sometimes, maybe it's coming from a really authentic place.
A desire for real connection.
Yeah. And maybe I've been misinterpreting people's intentions because of my own, like, social conditioning.
It makes you think, and it shows just how important it is to keep learning, to keep talking about these things.
The more we understand about neurodiversity, the better equipped we are to, like, actually create a world where everyone feels seen, heard.
Exactly.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, here's something to think about. Imagine we're designing a social experiment, but instead of testing for, like, fake empathy, the kind we perform, we're testing for the real deal.
Interesting.
And what would that even look like?
Yeah.
How do we move past those surface judgments and actually appreciate the different ways empathy can show up? Keep that question with you. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep. We'll see you next time.